My name is Glenn Perkins. I am the chair of this committee for the International Council of Museums on City Museums, and working here in my day job in Greensboro, North Carolina in the United States, where I'm the community history curator at the Greensboro History Museum, a city museum in North Carolina. It's always wonderful to be able to share a new issue of our committee's publication, the CAMOC Review, and the new spring-summer issue features some articles from authors all around the world. These articles highlight innovative practices and themes that really cross boundaries and that are applicable to cities east and west, north and south. Our review editor and CAMOC board member, Andrea Delaplace, has assembled some of her contributors today for a conversation about some of the important themes and contributions to this issue. And I'm going to hand things over to you, Andrea, to introduce our guest and get us started.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'll do a very short introduction of the main themes of this new CAMOC review, and then I'll let each one of the authors that are present here today to present themselves and a little bit of the topic of their articles. The main topics of this issue are innovative exhibition design in city museums, sustainability practice, community engagement, educational initiatives for younger audiences, and of course, the decolonization perspectives, among others. And I say, of course, decolonization because some of you might know already that we are planning to release in November 2025 for the 27th Triennial Conference, ICON Conference in Dubai, the decolonization special edition dedicated to decolonial practices in city museums. So Catherine Cole and Elka Weinstein, that are both part of the editorial board of the CAMOC Review, are going to be co-editors with me in this next edition. And I do invite you to keep an eye on our website to know more about this future project. But let's go back to this amazing edition, Spring-Summer Edition 2025, where we have articles from London, Dublin, Miami, Ghent, Paris, Rome, and many other amazing cities around the globe. So some of the authors are with us today. And before we started the roundtable, I just want to remind you all that it's not an academic webinar because the review, it's not an academic journal. It's a museum professional journal. Of course, we always invite researchers and professors to write as well and participate in our CAMOC Review publications. But the idea is really to talk about museums, not necessarily with an academic perspective. So the idea of the roundtable today is really to have a discussion where we're going to have some guiding questions that I'll be asking to our lovely authors, and you'll see them exchanging in between them. So the focus are the authors and their museums. I would also like to put up front that in an era of increasing polarization, misinformation, and global challenges such as climate change and migration, citizenship education plays a vital role in helping individuals. So city museums, as many other museums around the world, are facing these questions right now. And many of them are engaged in helping the public through educational programs to better understand democratic institutions and their responsibilities within them, recognize and respect diversity, cultural diversity, and human rights, developed media literacy and critical thinking, also engage in civic life and community decision-making, and last but not least, feel empowered to act for social and environmental justice and change. I'm just reminding everyone of that because I think we're living quite a particular heated moment around the world. And many museums, even if we come from different backgrounds, we're all facing these questions. So during this conversation, as you're going to see, all the authors here have reflected in one or many of these topics that I just pointed out now. So let's start the discussion. Let's go straight to the presentations. So I'll let each author present themselves. They have 5 minutes, and then we start the discussion. So let's go through the order. So I'll let Laura begin. Laura, can you please present yourself?
Thank you. Thanks, Andrea. Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Keogh, and I'm the Head of Engagement at Dublin City Council Culture Company. And my article focuses on one of the museum that we run, which is 14 Henrietta Street. And the article is called Revealing Dublin's Past at 14 Henrietta Street. So I'll just tell you a little bit about the museum. 14 Henrietta Street is a social history museum of Dublin life. So one buildings from Georgian beginnings to tenement times. And the museum is located in the heart of Dublin city, and it connects the history of urban life over 300 years in Dublin. Stories of people, the people who called this building home is what we focus on here. And at the heart of the museum experience is this house. So it's the museum itself, and it's interpreted through objects, stories of former residents, tour guides' accounts of the everyday realities of the people who lived here. So an important thing to us is really the stories, the lives of the people who call this place home. And what we do in the museum in 14 Henrietta Street, so we tell stories. So we retell the story of the lives of the people who lived here in 14 Henrietta Street. We engage, we make connections. So by listening and talking, we make connections with visitors, citizens, historians, former residents and their families. And we discover, so we uncover history by researching the house and its occupants and continuing to learn from the memory and the knowledge of others. So that's really important to us. So the residents who lived here were really lucky enough. The last residents moved out in the 1970s. So we have quite a large oral history project here that we call Your Tenement Memories, which focuses on those lives of the people who are still living today, who come to meet us, who give us their oral history. And the involvement of those residents has been really essential in this museum since its development. So the museum opened in 2018. So it's relatively new, but the residents have been involved from the start as much as, you know, the historians and the conservation. And that involvement has been kind of key to the development of the museum, but also key to the development of our oral history collection, and the role that that plays in the museum is really essential. So that idea of, I suppose, former residents being involved in decisions about the narrative of the house, being involved in very early stages about recollecting their memories, collecting their oral histories. They've been involved in cross-sectorial steering groups that led to the development of the museum, advisory groups. And I suppose that constant connection with the former residents is something that's really essential for the latter part of the history that the house tells, which is a living history. So a lot of my article will speak about that as well. And then I suppose one other thing to mention that's quite unique is the collection here. So as I said, the building plays a major part in the collection. So 50% of the collection is actually the building itself, 20% is physical objects, 25% is the oral history collection, and then 5% are artistic responses. So we have ongoing artists in residence and artistic responses here that also form part of the collection. But the historical fabric of the building is very important here. And for anyone who visited or may visit in the future, it's the walls, it's the floorboards, it's the fabric of the building that tells so many stories of the lives that lived here through Georgian times right up to the 1970s, through tenement times, and the house very much shows, I think, the two sides of the history of Dublin and that city or history of Dublin city living. And as I said, so the Tenement Memories programme is something that I concentrate on in the article. It's actually the part of the museum that I would run or look after in my role. And that's an ongoing programme. So it would have started collecting oral histories at the inception of the museum, but it continues. So we don't stop because the museum is open. We continue to collect those stories on a weekly basis, and we continue to learn from those stories. And very much what we learn is reflected back through the tours of the house. So, you know, the tours here, there's a standard tour, but actually each tour guide gives their own interpretation of those stories mixed in with the history and the historical facts of the house. So it gives quite a unique perspective of life in Dublin over a number of years. So that's, you know, a really important outlet for the oral histories, but also we use them in our programming. We use them for, you know, programming talks or different exhibitions or different things that are going on in the museum. Your tenement memories is an important source for that as well. And that has a huge impact on the museum. I think it's really evident when you visit that, you know, the importance, I suppose, that's placed on that as a collection and as an ongoing piece of work that's not ever finished. So, you know, we meet people who lived in this house, we've met people who've lived on this street, and also kind of wider tenement living in Dublin. So we've got quite an expansive collection of, you know, a period of time in Dublin, which really shows us about the city, from tiny small details to, you know, people's personal lives to, you know, large events that were happening over the years in Dublin as well. So it is really integral to the museum and how we operate here as well. And I suppose that keeping in touch with the people that we meet is very important, and finding ways to do that, making sure that people who were involved in the early stages of the museum are still involved and still feel like, which they do, they knock on the door and they come in and people feel like, as they should, because this was their home, they still feel like it is a part of them and it's a part of their home. So that, you know, I suppose my article focuses on that aspect of oral history as really being as part of, you know, at the heart of this museum and that ongoing practice and how important it is to us here as well. Is that my 5 minutes?
Yes, it's perfect, Laura. We're going to
Perfect.
the discussion later on. Thank you. So our next speaker is Annette Day from the London Museum. Annette, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and hello everyone. So yes, I'm going to talk a little bit about the article I wrote about London Museum, which some of you may know as the Museum of London. Until 2022, we were the Museum of London, but we have rebranded as part of a move to a new site. Sometimes we talk about it being a move, and sometimes we talk about it being the creation of a new museum, and in reality, it is both of those things. So in the article, I talk just a little bit about the project to create this new museum. And it's a project that began in 2016, would you believe? So by the time we open next year, it will have been a decade in the making. And so this is an interesting time to be writing about it, because we're still within the project rather than being at the end of it, but we're near the end. And what was really interesting for this article was that it made me look back at the early days of the project and the work that we did in particular in 2017 and 2018 to create an interpretation strategy and master plan. And it was so important to create those foundation projects for those foundation documents for a project this big. And one of the key things to mention is that we are moving from a 1970s purpose-built museum building to two market buildings, one from the late 19th century and one from the mid-20th century. So a completely different proposition, and they demanded that we thought very differently about the galleries. So in that work to create the interpretation strategy and master plan almost a decade ago, a number of key principles really were cemented. One really important one was that we wanted the museum to create personal and emotional connections for our visitors. It's not just about what you learn and what you think, but about how you feel and what you imagine. And so as part of that, diversity of representation and really bringing forth the voices of Londoners, particularly historians might not really have had much profile before, was really key. But we also wanted to look at how we could tell big narratives about London, particularly how London was shaped by and indeed shaped the world. And really important was a commitment to drawing in expertise with a real variety. We knew that this was too big for us to do ourselves, and we defined expertise very broadly to include academic scholarship, but also creative thinkers and storytellers, and people who could bring the expertise that comes from lived experience. And we lived that through the creation of the interpretation master plan, and we had a phase of what we called opening up the conversation to help us create all of those principles and to develop a shape for the museum. That expertise has been on a massive variety of topics from we've had specialist advisors who've been helping us around colonial and post-colonial histories, LGBTQ plus histories and disability histories throughout most of that project, and having that long-term support has been really important. And then we've had many critical friends and creative friends who've helped us with particular sort of areas of expertise. One of whom here is actually Mark, who I saw you just come into the room, who has really helped us thinking about how we represent faith in the museum. So in the article, I talk a little bit about how we created that master plan and how it set a foundation for the development of the museum. And then I go on to speak a little bit more about the permanent displays and some of the shifts that we make. And there are two really big shifts that we made in moving to this new, or beginning to move to the new plan, new site. The first is starting with London within living memory. All of the previous iterations of our museum have told a long chronological story, starting at the beginning with prehistory. We have made a shift, so visitors will encounter London within living memory first. And that really came out of the audience research that we did very early on, which shows that people gained a degree of connection and confidence from connecting with the history that they know before leaping back into that slightly more unfamiliar history. And obviously in London, we're telling a story of hundreds of thousands of years. And I also talk a little bit in the article about how we worked with many different advisors, writers and artists and people with lived experience to create stories that are complex and diverse and imaginative and really, truly human. And that's something that will be a real test for us when we do open the museum next year, as to how it makes people feel, not just what it makes people think, but how it makes them feel. And I might stop there if that's okay, but happy to answer questions once everyone has presented their article.
Thank you, Annette. That was perfect. And it's good that you finished your presentation talking about people's feeling regarding the museum, the exhibitions. I did mention that on my editor's note. I think that museums today, more than ever, are trying to create a more deeper connection with the audiences, being through empathy or oral history, as Laura already mentioned as well, the importance of creating this one-on-one connection through the memories, individual memories of collective memories that are represented in museums. But let's keep our presentations going. Thank you again, Annette and Laura. And now we're going to go over to Mark O'Neill and Professor Suzanne Macleod that also contributed to this CAMOC review with a very, very interesting article that it's based on a research developed by the Leicester University. Mark and Suzanne, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for the invitation to contribute to the journal and to this seminar. And thanks for the mention, Annette. Lovely to see you. I'm Mark O'Neill, former head of Glasgow Museums. I worked in the city for 30 years and I'm retired now and trying to make sense of my life's work in this research project with Suzanne. Suzanne, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Suzanne Macleod. I'm a professor of museum studies at the University of Leicester, where I'm also the co-director of the Research Centre for Museums and Galleries.
Thanks. Our article is stepping right back from the sort of up close and personal work that the two previous speakers have described. And looking at large-scale data across the past 20 or 30 years, we can see that attendance amongst all social groups has increased, including amongst what sociologists call lower socioeconomic groups. Suzanne, could you have the next slide, please? This is the data from England. And this increase, the bottom line is the lower socioeconomic groups, and you can see that the general direction is upwards. The red line is upper socioeconomic groups. So there's a number of things to say about this. So, but the main one is that the gap hasn't closed. It's about, the average is about 24 percentage points. But you can also see that from about 2011 onwards, the gap is increasing. The well-off group recover more quickly after the global financial crisis. And the data isn't very clear, but as far as we can see, the gap is now widening and it's about 30 percentage points. And as far as I can see, it's the same all over Europe and in North America. So this is not surprising really, because what it means is that museum attendance reflects overall large-scale structural inequality in society. Museums are quite a small sector, so combating major socioeconomic trends is very difficult. However, the reality is that most museums have audiences that are not even representative of current demographics. In other words, their audiences are more unequal than the wider society. This means that museums as a whole cannot claim to be reducing inequality. In the first stage of our research project, we found that it is widely accepted in the sociological literature that the single most important predictor of museum attendance isn't class or race or gender or even income, it's level of educational attainment. Most museum people are familiar with this. Every every additional educational qualification makes people more likely to visit museums. And there's a big jump at degree level. However, what this means in reality is that if we think of ourselves as educational institutions, even in the broader sense, that's not about learning that Annette mentioned, museums are failing to serve the people who could most benefit from the experience of visiting, and we're super-serving the already educated. So while progressive museums have standards to ensure high levels of access, we couldn't find a single museum that had an explicit strategy designed to make museums relevant and appealing to people with no or few educational qualifications. Progressive museums have made great strides in understanding the needs of minoritized groups, but being full of highly educated people, they struggle to imagine the life experience of those who are educationally disadvantaged. To break through this barrier will require a fundamental change in museum culture, and our research project is designed to do that. This slide, which I'd forgotten I'd put in, is based in Scotland, and it shows that the 20% best off people are twice as likely to visit a museum as the 20% worst off. But people with a degree or professional qualifications are nearly 5 times more likely to visit a degree than people with no qualifications. So the power of education as a driver of museum attendance is crucial. So I'll now hand over to Suzanne, who'll say something about the structure of our research and what we hope to do in the future.
Thank you, Mark. So we've spent the last 2 years running a network comprising academics from a range of disciplines, museums, funders, and policymakers, looking at the persistence of the attendance and benefit gap. We've tried to understand what it is about our sector and the way we work that means we've grown audiences but not addressed inequalities in attendance. What is clear is that current audience development strategies have reached their limit and we need new approaches. So the network revealed that the museum sector lacks a systematic research-based understanding of the social determinants of museum visiting. So a little bit like Mark has just set out, you know, some of those findings in the research were a surprise to us. So we lack this sort of basic but systematic research-based understanding of the social determinants of museum visiting. And as a result, we're unable to develop the policies, structures, strategies, and practices that are required to attract demographically representative audiences. This first stage of our research also found that cultural institutions, museums and galleries lack the theoretical foundations and methodologies to also do the other things that you can see here on the slide. So linking individual museum survey data with the population level data, and that fact, that statistic about level of educational attainment, a lot of museums, most museums maybe even, are not collecting visitors' education levels. Museums are lacking in the methodologies to describe innovations precisely enough to enable replicability. So when we make change, are we really able 2 years later to describe what we've done? To distinguish between an evidence-based innovation and the method and context of its implementation, to specify desired outcomes sufficiently to integrate user testing and co-production into routine work, We also lack the methodologies to link strategies for more representative audiences with our organisational knowledge gaps. And we're unable, once we've made change, and if we do drive some changes in visitor demographics, we're unable to pinpoint why. We aren't able to identify those causal connections. So we're now applying for funding for the next stage of our project, a highly interdisciplinary action research project, through which we'll draw on sociology, philosophy, museum studies, and implementation research in the health sciences to develop a research and implementation framework for museums and heritage organisations, something that will enable us to utilise research capacity in a way that's equal to this task of shifting the demographics. And this is how we're describing what we think that framework will do. It will provide a clear and actionable set of processes and methodologies through which we can do a number of things. We can undertake multidisciplinary analyses and build detailed understandings of complex publics and contexts. We can select from an evidence base of innovations that are shown to drive change and use those to help us guide our decision making. We can specify effective implementation strategies. And importantly, we can evaluate the effectiveness of both the innovation and the implementation, which will enable us to begin to understand what works and why. And all of that will be couched within a strategic research and implementation culture rather than a task-based, siloed culture. So our plan is to work on this for the next 4 years, and our plan is to build, test and refine the framework in situ in one of our large museum services here in the UK, and that's Birmingham Museums Trust. So we'll stop there, Andrea.
That's perfect. Thank you very much, Suzanne and Mark. Now let's go to our next author, Pietro Fenici. Can you please present yourself and your article?
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Let's just introduce myself. My name is Pietro Fenici, and I'm a PhD student of the Department of Architecture at the Roma University. And first of all, I would like to sincerely thank to Andrea for giving me this opportunity to be here and to write for the journal. And I'm the author of the article titled "The City Museum or City as a Museum, The Case of Rome," together with the Professor Paola Porretta, my PhD supervisor, alongside with the Professor Elisabetta Pallottino. So mine is a point of view of a researcher, and the content of this article is a part of my doctoral research focused on the theme of a city museum, particularly the hypothesis surrounding the creation of a future city museum in Rome. My research project stems from the long-standing debate dating back to the 1930s regarding the establishment of a city museum in Rome. My goal is to update the contents of this debate in light of experience and proposal put forward in recent decades, both national and international. To this end, I have identified many research, several significant European case studies which are significant, including the Museo di Storia di Barcellona, MUBA, where I conduct a research period between October and November 2024, and the Museum Carnavalet in Paris, where I plan to carry out study period in the near future. Naturally, my point of view is a specific point of view shaped my background, so I am an architect specializing in restoration with a philological approach to the study of historic building and stratified context. And as such, the idea of a city museum in Rome is explored in my research from an architect's perspective, trying to offer not only a theoretical framework, but also a practical vision. This perspective, starting from the fundamental assumption that the current Museo di Roma, located in Palazzo Braschi, is not sufficient to cover the city's later history, the central question of my research is, how should the city museum in Rome be organized? From what perspective should one tell the story of a city identified as deeply rotated into history and archaeology? The article tried to summarize some of the issue I encountered during the initial phase of my research about the Romance case, and it is divided into several parts. The first section is briefly introduced to the context of Roman case, framing within the debate unfolded through the 20th and 21st century. At the heart of this debate is two different positions. On one hand, the idea of a city museum, and the idea of a new city museum, and in the other end, the idea of a room like a diffuse museum. And these are some key questions I'm trying to address in my research, and that's it. And thanks for my attention. Thanks for the attention.
Thank you very much, Pietro. Let's go to our next author. It is Olgasabrina Rueda from the HistoryMiami Museum. Olga, can you please present yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. Hi, good afternoon or morning, everyone. My name is Olgasabrina. I am the Manager of Education and School Initiatives here at HistoryMiami Museum. My article focuses on a 2-year project I worked closely with the Smithsonian called Earth Optimism, Youth Action and Leadership, where I worked with 2 high schools in Miami, Florida, in working with the students, them getting into environmental sciences and just learning what environmental sciences is with a history lens, as well as having them get into practice and being part of the community while working with the environment. Yeah.
That's perfect, Olga. Sorry, I'm calling you Olga. Is okay, or you can do a short version of your name. Thank you very much. And now, last but not least, we have Emma from the Ghent Museum that also works with education. Emma, the floor is yours, please.
Hello, good evening, everybody, and thank you for the invitation. I'm Emma. I work at STAM. It's a city museum of Ghent in Belgium. And just to give you an idea of our location, we are located at an 800-year-old monastery, and it's based on a hospital site as well. So the monastery and the nuns who worked there took care of the sick people, and that's kind of the place where the museum is at. I'm part of Team Education and Public Engagement, and I will present to you my article very quickly. And I want to highlight especially on what we do for young audiences in our article. In general, the article is based on 3 pillars on how we are in an ongoing search of what we want to do with education. So we want to reinforce what we're doing today. For example, we offer a lot of guided tours, but we want to deepen them with teamed guide tours. But we also, and that's what I want to highlight today, are looking for new ways to engage with new audiences. And one of the things that the article zooms in about is trying to co-create and try to find a new way to engage with young audiences. And I have 2 cases that I want to quickly bring to you. And that's the ongoing search we're having today is that we notice that our classical guided tours are focused mainly on listening and on the transfer of knowledge. And that's a great way to do it. And it works for a lot of students, but not for everyone. It's not focused on a diversity of learning styles and a diversity of students and their lived experiences as well. So we are now developing 2 kind of alternatives that can be brought next to our more classical guided tours. And we can combine them with a guided tour as well. The focus here is students that are between 14 and 18 years old, because that's the majority of our group visits. In schools in Belgium, we learn at around that time about the history of the Middle Ages. And in our museum, we have a very broad collection on the Middle Ages. So it's a very logical step to step into museum for them. So next to the classical guided tour that has a chronological viewing, we decided to create a new workshop together with another museum in Belgium, and it's called Democracy. And it combines 2 words, democracy and cities, because the focus of a museum is, of course, the chronological period of time and Ghentian history, but as well urbanism and cities in general. And what we did with the workshop is we let students form political parties and help build a new city together. And that's why we're trying to stimulating to be more actively and to engage more in the debate, not just listening, but also thinking and let them search for new ideas and let them contribute to what they think of what a city should be like. So we let them form political parties, and then we start debate on how the city must look. That's one thing. And the other thing I want to focus a little bit on is that we noticed that we try to see the museum and the history of the city not as the goal for learning, but as a tool to talk about topics that interest pupils today. For example, how did Ghent handle poverty in the 17th century? And how is it different from how we look at poverty today? And what do you think could be solutions in the past as well as in the present? So what we try to find now is a more common ground with pupils while talking about topics, for example, poverty, democracy, inequality, or war, that transcend a specific period of time and can be more relatable to their everyday lives and their concerns and worries today. So we're in the search of what do we want our guides to be and how do we want their education to be, that it's more a shifting from more of a narrator to more of a mediator. And how can we talk to people, and how do we talk to students, and how do we stimulate them to also bring the voices that are not always heard in a group because of peer pressure and eye rolls and everything that people of that age are afraid to say in a group, not by always talking, but for example, the workshop by more doing so, or by putting the narratives that are important in their day-to-day lives.
That's perfect. Thank you very much, Emma. So let's go straight into some guiding questions. So I'm going to try to make 2 or 3 questions at the time because we only have 20 minutes or so left. So going back to the London Museum and the 14th Henrietta Street, and also you, Pietro, because you're doing a research on city museums and how they're evolving. How do city museums incorporate oral history and community-donated artifacts to foster a more participatory and multivocal approach to heritage? And maybe, Annette, you could develop also what strategies are institutions like the London Museum, that it's such a recognized and known city museum, are using to include diverse perspectives and in the main narrative, especially because now you're redoing the museum, you're rethinking the museum since 2016. If you could develop a little bit more on how the London Museum tried to do this transformation of the whole institutional frame to the community narratives. I hope if it's clear, and I let you and Laura develop. Maybe Laura, if you want to start, as you were the first one presenting.
Yeah, that's no problem. I suppose in terms of the fostering that more participatory and the multivocal approach, for here it was very much in the plan from the start. So that idea of it being a people-focused approach and a people-focused museum was there from the inception, and then building the foundations to support that. So the collection management policy, the education policies, the curatorial decisions that are made, your public engagement plan, that they all have, I suppose, the kind of ethos of this company, which is the idea of, participatory, for whether it's people that are residents or know the house, or people who are coming in through the door for the first time, that idea of a people first approach, that idea of, I suppose, a different focus on a different kind of collection, and some of that was because the building is the building, and there isn't space for objects or glass cases, or it's not a city museum in the traditional sense of the word. So I think that makes you maybe focus in a different way. And that idea that from the inception, it was always the idea that, that would be very much the focus of this museum. But then it's also about putting things in place that can continue, so that you don't, consult with people at the start and, collect an oral history collection and then you stop. So you have to continue to reinvent ways to keep those things alive, to keep people connected, to build relationships, to try something in a different way. But I think that kind of having that core ethos or having that core value there throughout is what's kind of guided this museum in that way as well.
Perfect. Annette, can you please?
Yes, I'll pick up. So I'll perhaps reach back a bit further beyond living memory. Obviously, we are doing quite a lot of work with oral history as well, but Laura has covered that really, really well. We've also been looking at how we can draw out the stories and voices of people for the period beyond living memory and long, long beyond living memory. And I suppose there's two parts. There've been two parts to that for us. The first is finding those stories, and that's something our own teams have been working really hard, but also drawing in experts from many different areas of expertise, looking at archaeological and osteological and documentary evidence and what we can find about our objects. So finding the stories first, but then thinking about how we convey them in a really vivid way, then is the second part of the process. And we've been working a lot with artists, illustrators, photographers, filmmakers to think about how we can present those stories, particularly when some of those stories can be sort of half concealed. Perhaps people don't have likenesses. We might know something of their story, but we may not know what they looked like, for example. So just looking at how we can use creative methods, but rooted in the evidence, to portray the stories of people from 200 years ago or 5,000 years ago in really vivid and immediate ways, so that visitors who come into the museum can find ways of, I guess, finding points of connection, recognizing themselves, finding ways into those stories in a very, very personal way. So I think it's been that mixture of research and imagination that has been really important, and getting that balance right has been key. And obviously, when we open next year, you can all come and see whether we've pulled it off. But that is certainly what we've been trying to do.
That's perfect. Thank you very much, Annette. And Pietro, let's go back a little bit to your research. So you're visiting different city museums in Europe, and your article actually is called City Museum, or the City as a Museum. So can you talk a little bit about why did you choose this title?
Yeah, I choose this title so because as I mentioned before, I try to start with the long-standing debate around the possibility to create a future city museum in Rome, and in particular between the 20th and the 21st century. And this debate is divided, as I said before, in two different positions. One of these is the idea to musealize all the city, all the historical part of the city, because to create a great diffuse museum in the city. And the other end, the proposal to create a new city museum. I'm trying to define something about that, and in particular, I found really relevant the concept of the historic Daniele Jalla to talk about the interpretation center. So I think the idea of the interpretation center, for example, a center like Museo di Roma in Palazzo Braschi, could be maybe, I think, a good solution for the enormous historical patrimony of the city. And for this reason, I wanna talk about my research with a question and not with with a sentence. So, and that's it. I don't know, so,
That's perfect. Thank you, Pietro. Sorry, we're going through the questions. It's just that we have a little bit of time, and that way as well we create some curiosity around the articles. Let's talk about a little bit now about education. So Olgasabrina and Emma, as you both work with education in museums, and as you were mentioning earlier, Emma, that the idea of learning through listening is great, is there, is present, but it's not the only way of learning in a museum. Why does citizenship education matter in today's world, and how it can help individuals, especially young individuals like children and young audiences like teenagers and young adults, to better understand their rights and responsibilities within a democratic society, especially today, as I mentioned at the very beginning of the discussion, that we are living this very chaotic period all over the world. And what are the challenges you both as educators are trying to overcome in your respective museums?
I don't know if you recognize this, Olga, but what for me is the most important thing that I talk to teachers a lot, and what they kind of all said to me is it's so difficult to engage in a discussion in a classroom if you have, for example, only 50 minutes or an hour to also give Latin or history lessons, or I don't know which lesson you teach. And then you come into a discussion and it pops up and it almost immediately heatens because there's one opinion and another opinion and it escalates very quickly in a classroom. And then as a teacher, you have to step out because your lesson is closed. And the next day you have to go back and you have to talk to your students again. And sometimes it's not resolved, issues that are in the classroom, because students are as well a part of the world, and the topics that live with them in an everyday in their everyday lives, it's impossible to get them out of the classroom. But for a teacher, it's very difficult to get them into the classroom. So that's what we notice with teachers, that it's very difficult for them. How do you step back into the classroom the next day when there was a heated discussion? And what we try as a museum is to create, and I know it's difficult to use that word, but to be a more neutral space, try to be a more neutral space or a safer space to talk about these subjects, talk about these objects. And what we do as a city museum that explains history is that we try to start from a historical point of view, so that it's not the a heated discussion of today, but in a broader and a more historical context. And that's a very important role for our guides, is that they will be more of a mediator than a narrator, and that they mediate in a classroom, in a room in a museum, and that they bring objects of a museum into the discussion and open it up, the discussion on a historical subject, to maybe get the sensitive topics out of the current day discussion, but more in a broad historical context. But it's a very difficult thing to do for our guides as well, because they are not neutral and they have their own opinions and their own kind of view of the world. But we try to, in only 1 or 2 hours, just get them out of the classroom and into the museum, and try to discuss these kind of topics that are maybe not as easy to have in a classroom. And also the voices that are not heard, we use a deep democracy as a tool to integrate the voices that are the no voices. Because in a group full of young people, there's a lot of peer pressure and everyone has the same vision, but that's not true at all. So the role of the guide is to get out these no voices in the classroom.
Thank you, Emma. Olgasabrina.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you, Emma. I think teachers here in the United States and America, like, they also have their pauses, and there has been difficulties in the classrooms and everything. And I think something as us as a museum, we try to bring in and give something extra within the classrooms for the teachers and also for the students to be able to see a wider view of for us, because we're in Miami, we focus more on like Miami history and Florida history, see more of a wider view on that they might not see in their classrooms. I think we also tend to work a lot with like community at HistoryMiami. So a lot of students, Miami, it's not a very museum range city. Like not a lot of people go to museums here, I think. And the ones who do come to the museum on field trips with the school, and them seeing representation through our guides or having community stakeholders on a program outside, I think that opens up the door. And like you said, it being a safe space for them to be able to interact with us as a museum a bit more, be more of a city museum. And through our guided programs and programs that we do offsite with the community, I think it also allows them to open up and to see how they can partake within the community as well, that it's not just what they see in their schools, but there are places within their community that they can attend and be participatory.
And thank you very much. And from your answer, Olgasabrina, like as you mentioned, not everyone visits, unfortunately, museums in your city. And that's the case as well in other big cities around the world. So going back to the research by Professors Suzanne and Mark, how can your research maybe enlighten ways to reduce the gap, the benefit gap, how to bring in different publics? Like you were during your presentation, you highlighted how the level of education influences the museum visitors. So the more educated, the more you want to visit a museum, the more you will bring your kids to a museum. So maybe Mark and Suzanne, if you could develop just a little bit more on that, please.
Okay, will I go first, Suzanne? There's only, yes, how long have we got? To be honest, I think most museums are in denial. I think a lot of their projects that they do to engage with non-visiting audiences are too small to make a difference. And I think they're kind of symbolic or maybe even tokenistic projects. So I think the first step is to look at the data, be really honest and face to see who is not visiting. And most museums will find that their visitors' demographic is dominated by well-off, well-educated white people, and facing the reality of who is not visiting is a huge psychological step that most museums avoid taking. And after that, then there's a whole series of strategic and practical decisions to be taken. But until you face that reality, you're living in denial.
Have been examples in the UK of museum redevelopment projects or major redisplays that have, for a period of time, changed the demographic. The problem is we don't know why. And then when the forces that be, people leave, something else happens beyond the institution. Was it even something that the institution had done that drove a change in the demographics, or was it something else that was happening more broadly in society? The problem is we don't know. So our research is really about shifting emphasis from those small projects, which at a population level can't make a difference. They can't change the overall demographics. And as those slides, I know they're very critical, but they're straightforward in the way that they point to the fact that we aren't linking up the research that we do in museums and cultural organisations with that, decades of cultural sociology that tells us exactly the same thing, which is that the audiences at a population level are not shifting. So I think the biggest thing that Mark and I are trying to do in the research is to really think about the systemic change, asking questions about actually what changes do we need to make to the way that we do research, the way we utilise our research resource, to the way that organisations are structured and working, that will and create a sort of systematic approach that over time we could learn something through about what's actually making a difference, and really shift the emphasis on to the physical museum and the who visits, because that's where we can make a really big difference.
Thank you very much, Mark and Suzanne. We only have like a few minutes left. I would like to open the same question to all of you, because I think that's something that link us all as like one of the main topics of the review. It is community engagement, and how you create this community engagement by bringing the histories, creating multivocality inside of the exhibitions, inside of the museum, but also how to bring in the public. So do any of you want to continue a little bit developing on that same question that I made to Mark and Suzanne? If you don't feel like answering it, I just wanted to ask Glenn, did we get any questions from the chat? So at least we can try to answer some of the questions, or maybe one question from the public with us today.
I see one hand raised from our friend Jean Roca. So I am going to allow you, Mr. Roca, to be able to speak and ask your question.
Do you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I just wanted to point out that such a huge amount of research and such a huge amount of work and such a huge big effort to be in touch with people, to explain the city, to link with the community, will need soon to arouse the question of how to protect museum directors, museum staff from authoritarian intervention. After the states that have been with the EMEA Awards in Eastern Europe very recently, city museums are not so safe. So it's just to tell that it's even more important what is being done now and that in the past, and that it will be very important to find a way to protect it as much as possible for the future. That's it.
Thank you, Joanne, and thank you for being here today with us. Does anyone wants to comment and develop a little bit on what Joanne just pointed out? Okay, I just got a message now on the chat saying from Tina Menendez, saying that Olgasabrina and her team in Miami analyzed who was visiting and why they weren't intentionally doing grassroots community work and outreach by bringing engagement and content to communities and out of the museum to remove barriers and build relationships. Olgasabrina, do you want to quickly talk about it a little bit? How did you and your team analyzed what Tina is bringing up?
Yeah. So me and my team in the education department, we kind of for a few years, we kind of went into the communities in Miami-Dade County to see who was coming to the museum, who was not coming to the museum. A lot of it was because of just access. having a prize type, and how we as a museum would be able to bring in those who have never been to a museum, or who weren't able to afford coming to the museum, to us. If not to us, we would be going out to them. So we worked a lot with different neighborhoods and communities, and us popping out a table and having different teaching collections and just talking about Miami history. We also gave out family passes, so a pass that would allow a family of 4 members to come to the museum for free. We also we're just in a lot of different communities throughout Miami-Dade County here, talking who we are and how the museum can be part of the community in the different areas of Miami.
Thank you very much, Olgasabrina. I would like to thank you all for your contributions. Like, it's already 7 p.m. here in Paris, so I do not want to keep the conversation going, even if we could develop so much more. The idea of the roundtable, again, was just to give you an idea of the different articles and topics that are being discussed in this new edition of the CAMOC review. As you'll see, some of the topics and do come back from edition to edition. So, for example, the latest one, we had a very interesting article by Muba from Barcelona talking about the Casa Barates and the social housing branch dedicated of Muba. So they wrote a beautiful article. And, for example, that is connected to the article by Laura and the 14 Henrietta Street in Dublin. Both museums talk about social housing. And as you'll see, all the topics are connected in different editions with different case studies from around the world. I would like just to close the discussions, again, thanking all the public that followed us today, thanking the authors again, thanking our chair, Glenn Perkins, for being the mediator and helping as well setting this online discussion. And again, I think that the comment that Joan Roca made, it's very important. We are living very difficult times, and as museum professionals, researchers, and professors, we are all facing a very difficult period to talk about citizenship, education, community engagement, democratic institutions. Like, we didn't enter those topics more deeply today because we do not have time, but I think that all museums around the world and universities as well are facing a very difficult time just being able to speak and express their ideas and talk about topics like migration, for example. So I was invited to a conference last Friday here in France, and my colleagues who study migration were saying that we had to be careful because we didn't know what type of questions and public we would have. And as we all know, migration at the moment, it's a very heated topic in between so many others. So again, thank you, Joan, for bringing that up. And just one last mention, I would like to mention that I'm very happy to have Marlene Moliu following us today. Marlene, all my deepest condolences to you and all my love to you in such a difficult moment. And also, I would like to send a big hello to Chet Orloff that wrote to us recently talking about Ian, one of the founders of CAMOC, that is going through a difficult health period. Glenn, if you want to build up on that. So again, thank you very much, everyone, for being with us today. And thank you again for all of the authors to be with us today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you all for being part of our conversation today. Our network, we really try to be a lot about people. So I think, sending those healing feelings to some of our long-term leaders and supporters is it's really about building these human connections that we hope can facilitate the institutional work that we're all dedicated to do, facilitating that participation of people within their cities. We do that work together better, I think, when we go across boundaries, across national boundaries, and really be able to learn from one another. So, thank you again, Andrea, for bringing these amazing minds together today to sort of cross, and we see this rich variety of topics that are within the CAMOC review. For those of you who are going to be looking for the issue, we are putting the final finishing touches on it, but it will be available on our website by the end of the week. And I think I have all of y'all's emails, so I'll be able to send you a link as soon as it's ready. Also on our website, you'll be able to learn about the upcoming conference, international conference in Dubai this November. The call for papers has been extended, so you can see our themes around urban heritage, people and representation in rapidly changing cities. And if you don't receive our email information, I've just put in one more link in the chat to sign up. You don't have to be an official member of ICOM even to be able to receive our emails. So I hope you'll do that. And thank you all for joining us again. And thank you, Andrea. And everyone, take care and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. So thank you all participants as well.
Bye.
You guys have been great.